When I think about my mother now, the first thing that comes to mind isn't her voice, it's the silence, that soft, heavy kind of quiet that lived in our house even when everything else was loud, the TV on, the kettle boiling, the neighbors talking outside. Her silence somehow found its way through all that noise. When I was younger, I used to hate it. I used to think she stayed quiet because she didn't care, because she didn't want to say what she really felt, and every time I tried to talk to her, she'd just smile that tired smile and say, "It's all right, son. Let it be. Let it be." Those 3 words followed me my whole life. I remember one evening, I came home angry after an argument with my father. I threw my bag on the floor and shouted, "Why don't you ever say anything, Mom? Why do you just stand there?" She didn't answer. She just looked at me with that same calm face, eyes full of something I couldn't read. Then she turned around, walked to the kitchen, and made me tea. I didn't drink it. I just left it on the table, untouched. Back then, I told myself I'd never be like her, quiet, patient, soft. I thought being loud meant being strong. I thought silence meant weakness. But years have a way of teaching us things we never asked to learn. Now, when I sit alone in my apartment, the city sounds outside, cars, sirens, laughter from the street, there's still a kind of quiet that creeps in. It's her quiet. It's the same one I once tried to run away from, the same one I blamed her for. Sometimes I catch myself doing the things she used to do, folding the dish towel twice before hanging it, humming the same little tune while waiting for the kettle to boil, and every time I do, it feels like she's right there, somewhere close but just out of reach. I used to blame her for everything, for not standing up for herself, for not stopping my father when he shouted, for not being the kind of mother who told stories or hugged too long. But now I just miss her quiet. There's something about losing a person that changes the sound of everything around you, the house, the air, the space where they used to stand. It all starts to echo differently. It's not empty. It's full of what they left behind. If I could sit with her just once more, I think I'd tell her, "Mom, I finally understand." But she's gone now, and I'm left here, listening to the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. It just teaches. Soft piano swells, then fades slowly. Would you like me to continue with part 2, the setup, almost equals 1,500 words, next, where I'll describe his childhood, family dynamics, and how his mother's quiet nature shaped his early years? I can start writing it right away. I grew up in a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, not even close. We had 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway, and a kitchen that always smelled like soap and coffee. My father worked long hours at a hardware store. My mother stayed home, though stayed home doesn't really describe what she did. She ran the rhythm of that house. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of her slippers sliding softly across the floor. She'd open the curtains, let the light spill in, and whisper a small good morning to herself, not to me, not to anyone, just into the air. Breakfast. She'd sit across from me while I shoveled cereal into my mouth. Sometimes she'd say, "Don't eat too fast, you'll get a stomachache." Sometimes she'd just watch quietly, a faraway look in her eyes, like she was thinking of a place she once knew. My father was the loud one. He wasn't cruel, not in a way you could point at, but he carried a kind of thunder in his voice. When he spoke, everyone listened, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. He'd come home tired, sometimes irritated about small things. If dinner wasn't ready, or if something was misplaced, the air in the house would thicken, and my mother would go quiet, not scared quiet, but the kind that said, "I'll take this. It's not worth fighting for." When I was little, I didn't understand her silence. It made me restless. I used to think she was letting him win. I thought she was weak. So, without meaning to, I sided with him. I copied his tone, his habits, even his impatience. I remember one evening when she asked me to wash my hands before dinner. I snapped, "Why does it matter? Dad doesn't." She didn't argue. She just smiled a little and said, "Because I asked you, that's why." That's how she was. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to control anyone. She just did her part quietly and let the rest fall where it may. It wasn't until I was older that I began to notice the little things she did, the things no one thanked her for, the way she folded my clothes so neatly, always matching the socks even though I never cared, the way she'd reheat my dinner after I came home late, pretending she wasn't waiting up for me, the way she remembered everyone's birthdays, even the Neighbors, she was the kind of person who noticed what others missed. If someone was sad, she'd bring them soup. If someone was angry, she'd leave them space. Her love was quiet, the kind that didn't announce itself. But when you're young, you don't value quiet love. You want words, gestures, fireworks. You want to be told everything. So I grew up thinking she didn't have much to say, and because she rarely talked about herself, I never really knew her story, where she grew up, what she wanted from life, what made her laugh when no one was around. She carried her past like a secret folded inside her, and maybe she meant to keep it that way. One afternoon, I came home from school early. She was sitting by the window, holding an old photograph. When she saw me, she quickly put it away. I asked her, "Who was that?" She smiled and said, "Someone I used to know." Then she asked how school was, as if the moment never happened. Years later, I found out that the photo was of her younger brother who died before I was born. She never told me that, not once. It's strange. I used to think silence was the absence of love, but now I see it was her way of carrying pain without passing it on. She didn't want to fill our house with her sorrow. She wanted us to have peace, even if she had none for herself. As I got older, I became more like my father, busy, distracted, practical. I left home at 18 for college in another state. I didn't call much. She wrote letters at first, short ones, careful handwriting. Mostly she'd ask if I was eating well, if I had warm clothes, if the weather was nice. Nothing deep. Nothing about her. I remember one letter ended with, "Take care of yourself, son. Don't worry about us. We're fine." I believed her. I always did, but she wasn't fine. I just didn't know it then. The years moved fast after that. I finished school, started working, got my own place. Calls became less frequent, visits shorter. Every time I went home, she seemed smaller, not physically, but quieter somehow. The light in her eyes was still there, but dimmer. She'd ask about my job, my friends, my plans, and I'd talk too much, filling every silence like it was a hole I needed to patch up. I thought if I kept talking, maybe she'd open up too, but she never did. She just listened, really listened, like every word I said mattered. One day, I asked her, "Mom, don't you ever get tired of being quiet?" She smiled faintly and said, "Silence keeps me company." At the time, I rolled my eyes. Now, that sentence haunts me. Soft piano re-enters. There was something about her presence that grounded the entire house. Even when I was away, knowing she was there made everything feel safe. Like no matter how far I went, there was always a light on somewhere waiting for me. And that's the thing about people like her. You only realize how much space they filled when they're gone. But I wasn't ready to learn that yet. That lesson would come later, quietly, just like she used to. There comes a time in every child's life when their parents start to fade into the background. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, like the dimming of a light. You get busy. You start chasing life, work, money, plans, people, and before you know it, the voices that once filled your world become just part of the noise you tune out. That's how it happened with me and my mother. After I moved away for work, I called her every Sunday, at least at first. She'd always answer on the first ring. "Hi, Mom," I'd say, half distracted, typing something on my laptop. She'd reply softly, "Hi, son. How are you?" And I'd tell her everything, my deadlines, my boss, my rent, everything except the things that really mattered. Sometimes there would be silence on the other end, and I'd get restless. "Mom? You still there?" I'd ask. She'd chuckle gently and say, "Yes, I'm listening." Always listening. Never interrupting. I thought that meant she didn't have anything to say, but looking back, I think it meant she just didn't want to take up space I needed. Months passed. My calls became shorter. Sometimes I'd text instead, a quick "busy today, talk later." And she'd reply, "Okay, take care." Always those same words, take care. It's strange how love can sound so simple when you're too distracted to hear it. Then one year, I forgot her birthday. Completely. It wasn't on purpose. I just had a major presentation at work, and the day slipped past me. When I realized 2 days later, I called her right away, already rehearsing my apology. She answered, and before I could say anything, she said softly, "It's all right, son. You're busy." I know. That hurt more than any anger could have. Her calmness, that quiet understanding, made me feel small. I wanted her to be upset, to tell me I'd disappointed her, to show she cared, but instead, she let it go. That was her way. Always letting go. Always making it easy for me. The next time I visited home, things felt different. The house looked smaller, emptier somehow. My father's voice was still the same, loud and commanding, but Mom, she moved slower. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes the way it used to. At dinner, she kept asking if I wanted more food. Have some more rice, you barely ate, she said. I'm fine, Mom, I replied, scrolling through my phone. She hesitated, then quietly picked up my plate. It was such a small moment. I didn't even think about it then, but now, I remember every detail of it. The way she sighed softly, the way her hands shook just a little when she took the dishes away. Later that night, I heard her coughing in her room. It was a dry, stubborn cough that wouldn't stop. I stood in the hallway, listening. Part of me wanted to check on her, but another part told me she'd be fine. She always was. So I went back to bed. That's how it goes sometimes. We mistake strength for invincibility. We think the people who never complain are the ones who never hurt. Months later, she called one evening. I remember exactly where I was, sitting in my car after work, too tired to talk. She said softly, "How have you been, son?" I told her, "Busy, Mom. You know how it is." She said, "You sound tired. Don't forget to rest." And I said something like, yeah, I will." Then she paused and said, "It's getting cold here. I've been wearing that scarf you bought me last winter." I smiled faintly, staring out the windshield. "That's good," I said, and that was it. We talked for a few minutes more, mostly about nothing, and then I hung up. I didn't know that would be the last time she'd call me just to talk. After that, my father started picking up instead. He'd say she was resting, or out in the garden, or not feeling too well. I believed him. I didn't ask questions. I told myself I'd visit soon. But soon has a way of stretching out longer than you plan. Soft piano returns, slower now. One afternoon, my father called me. His voice was quieter than usual, too calm. He said, "Your mother's been unwell. Nothing serious, but the doctor says she needs rest." I said, "Should I come?" He paused. No, just work. She'll be fine." So I didn't go. Instead, I sent her flowers, the same kind she used to plant outside our old window. She called to thank me. Her voice sounded light, but weaker somehow. She said, "You didn't have to, son. They're beautiful." I said, "You deserve it, Mom." And she replied, "You always say nice things when you're far away." It was such a small line, but it lingered. I laughed it off, but something inside me stirred. A few weeks later, I got another call, this time from my father again. He said, "Your mother's been admitted to the hospital. It's just precautionary." I asked what happened. He said, "Her heart's weak. They're running tests." I remember staring at my desk at work, my fingers frozen over the keyboard. For the first time, silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a weight pressing on my chest. I booked a ticket that night. When I reached the hospital, she was asleep. Her face looked so small against the white pillow, her skin pale, her breathing slow. I stood there for a while, not sure what to do. When she opened her eyes and saw me, she smiled faintly. "You came," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. We didn't talk much that day. She just held my hand, her fingers thin, trembling slightly. After a while, she said, "Don't look so worried. I'm fine, really." That was her, comforting me when it should have been the other way around. Over the next few days, I stayed with her. She'd fall asleep mid-conversation sometimes. Other times, she'd look out the window, eyes lost somewhere beyond the horizon. Once, she said softly, "I miss the sound of the wind through the old curtains." I didn't know what to say. How do you answer a sentence like that? Soft strings began under the piano, faintly melancholic. Before she was discharged, she took my hand again and said, "Promise me you'll take care of yourself. And don't hold on to anger. Life's too short for that." I nodded, half listening, still too afraid to imagine a world without her. She went home after that, but she never fully recovered. Every call became shorter, every visit felt more like a goodbye, and still, I never said the things I should have done. I never told her I was sorry for being impatient, for misunderstanding her quiet. I never told her I loved her, not directly. Maybe I thought she already knew. Or maybe I was just too proud to say it out loud. And then, one evening, my father called again. His voice cracked this time. He said just one sentence: "She's gone, son." Music fades to silence. Then soft wind. The world went quiet in a way it never had before. It wasn't just the absence of her voice, it was the silence that came from everything she used to hold together: the house, the warmth, the invisible thread between all of us. Gone. I flew home the next morning. The house looked the same, but nothing inside it felt alive. Her teacup was still on the counter, her slippers by the door, little signs of a life that had ended quietly, the way she lived. Pause, a deep breath sound. I used to blame her for everything, for the quiet, for not standing up, for not fighting, but as I stood there in that silent kitchen, I realized, her quiet wasn't weakness. It was her strength, her peace, her way of loving us without adding to the noise. After she passed, the house felt different, not empty exactly, more like time itself had paused, holding its breath. Every object seemed to whisper memories: the worn-out couch, the table in the dining room, her favorite chair by the window. Each piece carried a story she never told. It was my father who suggested I go through some of her things. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid of what I might find, afraid of confronting the woman I thought I knew, and realizing how little I really did. I started in the study, a small room filled with books and papers. On the desk, I found an envelope addressed to me, her handwriting, familiar, soft, slightly shaky. The envelope was thick. I didn't want to open it immediately. I sat on the floor, holding it in my hands, feeling the weight of it. Finally, I opened it. Inside were dozens of letters, not the kind you send in the mail, but personal ones she had written over the years. Some dated back to before I was born, others from the years I had moved away. I began reading. The first letter was from her early 20s. It spoke of her brother, who had died young. She wrote about how lonely she felt, how much she wished someone had been there to share her sadness. She wrote about learning to be quiet, to carry her pain alone, because she didn't want to burden anyone else. Tears began to fall. I had never imagined that my mother had such sorrow hidden inside her. Then came letters written during my childhood. One was dated the week I had yelled at her for not saying anything when my father shouted at me. She wrote, "I know you are angry, and I know you think I don't care. But I love you more than I can ever explain. Sometimes words cannot carry everything I feel. Please forgive me for being silent. I want you to grow without carrying my pain." I couldn't breathe. All those years, I had blamed her for not defending herself, blamed her for letting me feel alone, and now, I realized that every silence had been her way of protecting me. The letters continued, small observations, small acts of love she had done quietly: how she stayed up late to knit my sweater in the winter, how she walked to the store every day to make sure we had fresh bread, how she wrote little notes and left them in my lunchbox, even when I didn't notice. And then I found something else, a journal, hidden in the bottom drawer of her desk. It wasn't meant for anyone else to read. It was raw, honest, and full of emotion she had never shared. She wrote about the fear she carried for me, the sleepless nights worrying I wouldn't be safe, the quiet grief she endured watching me grow up, knowing I might make mistakes. She wrote about wishing she could tell me everything, about her childhood, her dreams, her losses, but she didn't want me to feel burdened. I realized then something I had never understood as a boy, or even as a man: her silence wasn't absence. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't indifference. It was love, deep, steady, unspoken love. I sat there for hours, reading every word, letting it sink in. Every letter, every line, was a piece of the woman I had thought I knew, a woman stronger than I could have imagined, carrying her world on her shoulders without complaint. One letter made me cry harder than the others. It was written during the year I had stopped calling as often as I should have. She wrote, "I know life is busy for you. I understand if you forget to call. I only wish you knew how much I think of you every day. I am proud of the man you are becoming. My love is always with you, even when I am silent." I had spent so many years thinking she didn't care, and now, I understood that she had carried me in her heart all along. The most powerful discovery was a small, folded piece of paper tucked inside the last letter. It was a list, a life lesson she had written for me, short sentences, simple words, but full of wisdom. Be kind, even when others are not. Forgive, even when it is hard. Speak your love, don't wait. Carry your heart gently, and remember, silence can be full of strength. I held that paper in my hands and cried until my chest ached. For the first time, I truly saw her, all of her, the mother who never raised her voice, the mother who bore her sorrows alone, the mother who loved silently, completely, endlessly. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by her quiet strength, the patience I had learned, the empathy I had absorbed without noticing, the resilience I had, it all came from her. And I had taken it for granted. I remembered the small moments, sitting in the kitchen while she made tea, her humming in the garden, the gentle brush of her hand when she adjusted my collar. I had been too busy, too impatient, too blind to notice the depth of her love, and now, it was too late to tell her any of it, too late to say, I'm sorry. Too late to hold her hand and tell her I understood. But even in that grief, there was a strange kind of comfort. She had left me her words, her heart on paper. Her love was still here, waiting for me to recognize it, waiting for me to learn from it. I sat there for hours, reading and rereading the letters. I laughed quietly at the moments she had described with gentle humor. I cried quietly at the things I had missed, and I listened, really listened, to the mother I had blamed for so long. Her silence had been her gift, her quiet had been her way of teaching me, guiding me, loving me without demanding anything in return. And now, finally, I understood. I picked up the last letter and whispered aloud, even though she wasn't there, Mom. I get it now. I understand everything. I love you. I always did. And for the first time in my life, I felt like she was listening. After reading her letters, the house felt different. It wasn't empty in the same way anymore. It was full of her presence, not loud or demanding, but quiet, steady, comforting. Every little corner seemed to hum with the life she had lived quietly, patiently, endlessly. I began to notice the things I had overlooked when I was younger. Her favorite chair by the window, now empty, still caught the afternoon sun just the way she liked it. The kitchen counter where she kept the small vase of fresh flowers, the folded dish towels, the little notes left on the fridge, reminders of a love I had never fully seen. I started spending more time there, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I would sit in her chair and let the quiet sink in. Sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine her humming softly, tending to the garden, smiling at me in that calm way she always had. I realized that grief isn't only about sadness, it's about understanding what someone gave you, even when you didn't notice. It's about seeing their life, their choices, their love, their sacrifices, and finally appreciating it fully. Work no longer felt urgent in the same way. The deadlines, the meetings, the constant noise of life, it all seemed smaller, because now I carried her quiet with me. I carried her patience, her careful love, her way of noticing things no one else would. I started calling my father more often. We talked about her, shared memories, laughed at her little quirks. It was strange at first. I had avoided these conversations for years because they made me uncomfortable. Now, they brought comfort. One afternoon, I found her gardening gloves in the shed. I held them in my hands and laughed softly. She had always said she didn't need anyone's help outside, but I remembered how she would pull weeds slowly, humming a tune I could never quite recognize. Now, I decided to plant something in her memory. A small rosebush by the window she loved so much. As I planted it, I whispered, I get it now. Mom. I understand. And though she wasn't there physically, I felt her quiet presence, approving, loving, steady. I also began to notice my own children differently. The way I had once hurried through my own life, missing her lessons, I didn't want to miss theirs. I would sit with them, really sit, listening to their stories, their little complaints, their triumphs. I tried to hold my tongue when impatience bubbled up. I remembered how she had always listened, never interrupted, never judged. I realized that her love wasn't gone. It lived in the way I approached the world, in the quiet acts of care I now noticed around me. Her silence had taught me more than words ever could. There were moments of sharp grief, of course, nights when I would wake up, imagining her voice, wishing I could tell her all the things I never said, wishing I could apologize for my impatience, my judgments, my ignorance, but even in those moments, there was comfort. Because now I understood her. I began reading her letters again and again. Every line, every word, became a guide. She had left me her heart on paper, and it was my responsibility to carry it forward. I also spoke to old friends of hers, women who had grown up with her, neighbors who had known her for years. They told me stories I had never heard, how she had helped others quietly, how she had been a source of comfort to everyone she met. I realized that her impact was far greater than I had ever understood, not because she was loud or demanding attention, but because she had always given selflessly, silently, and without expectation. One evening, I found myself in her favorite room, holding the small list of life lessons she had left me. I read them aloud again. Be kind, even when others are not. Forgive, even when it is hard. Speak your love. Don't wait. Carry your heart gently, and remember, silence can be full of strength. I realized that I had been carrying her lessons with me all along, in the way I treated my family, in the way I faced challenges, in the way I listened when others needed me. Her love had shaped me more than I could have imagined, and I promised myself I would honor it. I would let her quiet strength guide me. I would live in a way that reflected her patience, her understanding, her endless care. Months passed. The pain of her absence softened, replaced by gratitude. I started sharing her story with my children, telling them about her quiet ways, the small things she did that showed her loved. I wanted them to understand that love doesn't always need words. Sometimes, it is in the small, unnoticed moments, the way someone waits for you to come home, the way someone folds your clothes, the way someone carries your heart in silence. I also began writing my own letters, not to anyone in particular, but letters I would read one day to my children, or perhaps just keep for myself. Letters about what I had learned from her, about the kind of person she was, about the way I had misunderstood her and finally understood her. It was my way of keeping her alive, not in memory alone, but in the way I lived. One evening, as I sat by her favorite window, watching the sunset, I whispered, "I love you, Mom. I always did. And now I know." The wind brushed the curtains gently, and for a moment, I felt her presence, soft, steady, calm, and loving. Her quiet had finally spoken to me, and I was listening. I had spent years blaming her for everything. Now, I spent my days missing her quiet, not the silence I once resented, but the kind of quiet that holds a lifetime of love, patience, and understanding. And that quiet, I realized, would always be with me. Now, when I sit in her favorite chair, I often close my eyes and imagine her here. I picture her folding laundry, humming softly, watching the world from the window she loved so much. Sometimes I hear her voice in my mind, "Take care, son. Don't worry so much." It's not a voice of scolding or disappointment, it's the voice of patience, of love that never demanded, never shouted, just held. I think about all the moments I misunderstood her, all the times I thought her silence meant she didn't care, and I feel a quiet ache, not for anger or regret, but for missing the chance to tell her what I feel, while she was still here. But that ache has also become a guide. It reminds me to speak my love to those who matter. To notice the quiet gestures of care around me. To cherish patience, empathy, and presence more than words. I still sometimes catch myself rushing, getting frustrated at small things, but then I remember her, standing quietly, letting life flow, carrying all her worries for herself so I wouldn't have to. And in that moment, I paused, I take a breath. I remember her life wasn't full of loud moments or dramatic gestures. It was in the quiet mornings, the steady hands, the gentle listening, the way she loved without demanding anything in return. And I realize now that love doesn't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it whispers, in actions, in patience, in silence. I carry her quiet with me every day. In the way I talk to my own children. In the way I fold a towel carefully, like she used to. In the way I sit still and listen, really listen, to those I care about. And though she is gone, I feel her presence in that quiet. A steady, unshakable love that never left me, even when I didn't understand it. I used to blame her for everything. Now, I just miss her quiet, and I am learning to live with it, to honor it, to carry it forward in everything I do. Her silence taught me more than any words ever could. It taught me patience, empathy, resilience, and above all, loved. I will never forget it, and someday, I hope to pass it on, quietly, gently, fully, just as she did.